Hi, I'm Paul Baxendale and welcome to blog post number 6. This week's blog post is called Training in Temple Gym and Dorian's Surprise Question. From that very first visit I made to Temple Gym, just after my NABBA British final first appearance, I made a promise to myself that if I was going to become a pro bodybuilder and the best that I could be, then Temple Gym was the place I had to train. And if there was any way I could manifest it, to train with Dorian himself. At that time, looking back now, it seems a very big goal to aim for. He was Mr. Olympia and I was a nobody. But a nobody with desire and a plan and commitment. I suppose this is a lesson in how goal setting, planning, following through, dedication and commitment can pay off in ways you'd find hard to imagine. The funny thing was, at that time with youth and ignorance and naivety on my side, I never believed I couldn't make it happen. I had not been worn down by life at that point. It gets harder as you experience more knockbacks in life. But you must throw those negative thoughts out of your mind. And so I set about a plan on how I was going to do it. The naivety of youth can be a wonderful thing. But even as we go through life and discover not everything is straightforward, and many times things don't go your way, and indeed people will appear to try and slow you down. Remember, as Marcus Aurelius says, as you move forward along the path of reason, people will stand in your way. They will never be able to keep you from doing what's sound. So don't let them knock your goodwill for them. I lived at that time in Swindon, some 1.5 hours to 2 hours away from Birmingham. And it was often a 4-hour round trip, depending on traffic. 3.5 hours on a good day, 5 hours on a leg day, when I had to stop frequently on the motorway due to my legs cramping. So a 4-hour round trip. Nowadays I hear people complaining when they've got to drive 20 or 30 minutes to their gym to train. It's all about how important something is to you. I currently train at Vicky McCann's Body Academy, which was 50 minutes away from my home in the Highlands of Scotland in Fascally. But it's the best gym around in which to train and to try and get results. I'm after those results still at my age, so I do it. It's as simple as that. I also worked full-time in an insurance company at the time. So I had to take every single day of my annual leave to enable me to train in Birmingham there 3 times a week and training at weekends as well. It left me with no holidays at all. Well, holidays, that was a choice that I made. Once again, how important is something to you? Years later, and even today, I hear people talk about or comment on how lucky I was to have the mentors in my life. And they're right, I was lucky. But I also worked very hard to create the luck, to have them nearby, to notice me, and to see the dedication and desire for them to think, now there's a young guy who's given it all he can. Maybe he could add something to my workout, maybe, even if it's just his energy. So arranging my annual leave with my boss, who thought I was mad, but was very happy as it meant he didn't have to arrange cover for a 2 or 3 week break in one block each year, as if I'd gone abroad like everyone else. My girlfriend at the time, a lovely girl called Sarah, had a mother who lived in Telford, which was just 30 or 40 minutes away from Birmingham. So it meant that we could drive up on a Friday evening after work each week, and I could train at Temple on a Saturday and a Sunday, depending on when Dorian was training. Sometimes he would train both days, which was awesome and a bonus, and sometimes just a Saturday or just a Sunday, in which case I would always take the opportunity to train at Jim and Sati's gym in Shrewsbury, Future Physique. Jim Bolton was a competitive bodybuilder, and Sati was his sweetheart girlfriend. She's still a sweetheart, who I'm still friends with after all these years. So it allowed me to get to know another top bodybuilder and also get some great training in at their fantastic gym full of Panatta sport equipment and have a chat with them both. My girlfriend would often come along too to train, but more often than not she would spend the time with her mother. Her father had passed away very young, so her mum was very happy to have her with her every weekend, as you can imagine. Her mother even liked me. So it was a happy time and a very productive period of training. As I watched Dorian and Kenny Brown train whilst I trained, often had a chat with them both after training, and also got to see another world-class bodybuilder in Jim Bolton and make some lifelong friends in the process. Yes, it was a huge commitment and a huge cost in time, money and effort, but I never ever saw it that way. And looking back, it would be right to see that effort I made was an investment in my future, not a cost. You know, many people used to question why I went to all that trouble to train at Temple, drive all those miles and use my weekends, my holidays, driving, training, eating and sleeping, all focused around my goal rather than go out and party. Or when I was at home, why then would I work the doors rather than participate in the club scene they were enjoying? Well, I know from first-hand experience that many of them often didn't enjoy those nights out at all. Instead, they got drunk, maybe got into some trouble, maybe got so-called lucky, had a one-night stand with a girl. Well, I didn't know about stoicism back then, but I did know what I wanted to be, and that was the best bodybuilder I could possibly be. Clubbing, I often hated what I saw in clubs. How men and women behaved when drunk really put me off. Some people I otherwise thought of as okay. But to see them acting dishonourably, vulgarly, definitely not classy. Often I saw them at their very worst, sadly. And as for one-night stands, wasn't I worth more than that? Was I going to risk my reputation, my virtue, my nobility? For that was why people were looking up to me. For the risk of STDs, getting someone pregnant, knowing I would be letting myself down, my honour, my integrity, my soul. Why would I spend all my life trying to be the very best person I could possibly be, to then give it away to someone not worthy of it? Now, if I was going to have a relationship with someone, it would have to be meaningful. And then it would always have to be with someone who I valued myself. Anyway, I was in a long-term relationship, so it didn't even enter my head back then. I'll tell you how easy and how sad it was back then working the clubs. When I would leave the club after my shift, and that's after several propositions during the night anyway, there would always be at least 3 or 4 women at the door, ready for when I opened the door to go home, asking me would I give them a ride home. Well, I think they had more in mind than perhaps a drive home. Anyway, it kind of put a very uneasy feeling inside of me that both men and women could possibly cheapen sex, what I thought and still think is something that should be a special union between 2 souls within a long-term, preferably a married relationship, maybe growing up watching those old movies. Maybe they gave me rose-tinted spectacles on how relationships should be, but I'm glad I behaved the way I did. You see, my wife knows that when she met me, if I was going to enter into a sexual relationship with her, then she knew that she was special to me, and I know that she did. Short-term gratification is never worth losing the possible glory of long-term rewards. Never. Remember this, friends, as Aurelius tells us. Yes, getting your wish would have been so nice, but isn't that exactly why pleasure trips us up? Instead, see if these things might even be nicer. A great soul, freedom, honesty, kindness, saintliness, for there is nothing so pleasing than wisdom itself, when you consider how sure-footed and effortless the works of understanding and knowledge are. Anyway, this was pleasure to me, because I knew it was part of my plan to moving forwards in life. Forwards and upwards. I used to look forward to the weekends, as I knew that I would be seeing Dorian train, maybe speak with him. And I was also getting very friendly with Kenny. We would normally go out to eat after the training session had finished, and we would go to the local shopping centre in Birmingham, the Bull Ring, and we would have jacket potatoes and chicken or vegetables. It was always the order. We would always invite Dorian along too, but he always ate at home, Debbie preparing his post-workout meal, and then he would go for a sleep for a couple of hours afterwards. I do remember he was sometimes very tempted to come along. As he got to trust me and he got to know me, he wanted to continue our conversations, and he hung out with us longer too. But his discipline always won the day, as the meals we had in the centre, they weren't weighed out like the ones he had at home would be. There was one day, however, that I really thought that he was going to come with us. We invited him as usual, and he said, yeah, he'd like to. We grabbed our bags, and after our post-workout shakes and chat, we were about to head for the door when the phone rang. The guy who worked reception, when Dorian answered it, called across saying, Dorian, it's Debbie. She says your dinner is ready and it'll be on the table to get back within 10 minutes. Oh yes, Debbie was the gatekeeper, all right. She was his support when even the monastic Dorian Yates' own discipline would waver, even though it was just going out for a clean meal with his friends. She was awesome. I trained on my own in Temple Gym and only ever spoke to Kenny and Dorian after their workouts. And I would travel there 3 times a week and every week to make sure I was around, to be near them, to watch them and to learn. And not only the training and the exercises and the intensity, but how they carried themselves. They were a few years older than I was and much more advanced in bodybuilding. So I watched and I learned the things that I felt would improve me both as a bodybuilder and as a person. The total seclusion of their zone while they trained, the laser-like focus and complete and total connection between the two of them while they trained, the effort, the intensity, the energy, the exclusion of everything else in life as soon as they walked down those steps, and the burning desire and non-stop work that existed throughout the workout right until the very last rep of the last set had been completed, and never a second sooner. There was always something to learn and I soaked it up, loving every minute of it. It was everything I'd been looking for, the purpose, the mission, the thing I could dedicate myself to that was mine completely. Something inside of me was switched on with what I was seeing. You know, there's a funny quote from Aurelius that rarely ever gets mentioned, but it's so true. We have all heard of the great people, the people who have charisma and presence. Presence so strong that everybody looks at them when they walk into a room. Well, Aurelius said it this way. In short, the straightforward and good person should be like a smelly goat. You know when they are in the room with you. I knew, I had a sense of complete confidence and knowledge that this was the very essence of me. It wasn't something that I could do or I wanted to do. It simply was me. Whatever it was I had felt, it was my truth, my essence. Whatever it is I was going to do with it, I wasn't sure at that point, except that I was going to compete, improve, get bigger, get better, and climb the ladder of competitive success until either I reached the top or another path within the same sport opened up for me. It was time to go to work. So I would travel up to Birmingham once or twice each work week and then every weekend. My own training was evolving as I learned from watching Dorian and Kenny. And back in Swindon, I began to implement as much as I could, replicating what I had seen. To train heavy duty style, you need a training partner, as it is the high intensity techniques at the end of what most trainers would call failure that distinguishes it from every other training style and is also what gives it its results. So I had to ensure I had great training partners, otherwise my results would be less than optimal. Now, it is here that I do call myself lucky. I was blessed with the greatest friends and training partners during that time, people that were not only willing to try new things, but were willing to go to places physically and mentally that most people just can't go. The first real training partner I had was a work colleague of mine from the insurance company. He wasn't a hardcore bodybuilder. He wasn't huge. Sorry, Rich. He wasn't interested in competing in the slightest. But he had something most people do not have. He had heart. And he had it in abundance. Training straight from work, we would meet up, often with another friend, hi Bus, and they would often train alongside me and push me to my limits. Now, when I say push me to my limits, they were ready to literally see me suffer. Maybe that's why they enjoyed it. And they were completely on side in seeing me develop and grow, and at the same time enjoy their own workouts. It wasn't like many training partners I've had since, in that with these guys we would often have a laugh, but those laughs often only became because I was so damn serious. It broke the ice. I remember one evening, and we still laugh with each other to this day about this, when I was training chest and I was doing decline bench press. Yes, at the start of his career, and when I first saw him train, Dorian would still use a decline press in his chest workout. Never the flat bench, but the decline was often the first movement of the day. So I'd warmed up and I built my weights up ready for my one working set. I had 4 plates aside on the bar, and it was as heavy as I'd ever gone and would ever go in my training. I put my hands on the bar and counted 3, 2, 1, boom. Rich handed me the bar, and down it went, and then back up again, down again, and so forth, until I was struggling and needed a slight touch. Rich, as always, was right there, but at the end of the set, something went wrong. The bar slipped out of his hands or out of mine, or I thought he had the bar when he thought I still had it, whatever. The end result was I relaxed with the bar still in my hands, and it came crashing down towards my chest before right at the last moment I was able, with Rich's assistance, to stop it and get it back up and racked. I looked up from the decline bench and said, "Fucking hell, man." There was silence, and then all of a sudden, an absolute scream of laughter as we both realised, A, I was okay, and secondly, the outburst was so unlike me, so out of character, that the whole gym had turned around to see what was going on. Even I was in stitches. And forever after, we have the standing joke of FHM between us. We just have to say the letters and we start laughing. Even today, we will write it in messages. FHN. Fucking hell, man. It's funny. We will be in stitches and people around us won't have a clue what we're laughing about. Rich is one of the nicest, smartest, most generous guys you'll ever meet. And we're still as close today as we ever were. He's now retired from the insurance company that was with well over 20 years. And he's now engaged in a lot of charity work. Well, my next training partner that really stands out in my mind, there were plenty of them. But if you know what high intensity training entails, then you will understand why I went through so many training partners over the months and years. Most people often lasting only one session, and many not even making it to the end of one session. There was a small, short guy called Steve. Steve also worked for the same company, but he was more serious about bodybuilding. And he had all the clothes and all the attitude. Indeed, he lasted a lot longer than many guys who thought of themselves as true iron warriors. He had grit. The thing with Steve was he had a habit of copying the things I did, everything I did. Whether it was a mannerism, the things I said, and even down to the clothes I wore, including the bandana on my head at times. I remember I often wore a bandana around my head, as was the fashion in bodybuilding at that time, although no one in my town was wearing one. So I was a bit of a novelty in wearing one, so I thought. Although to be fair, I was a bit of a novelty in the town anyway, really. There weren't too many people walking around the way I did, and that was in a suit and tie. Well, I'd been wearing this bandana for about a week when I turned up to train on normal time, only to find Steve with the same bandana wrapped around his head. What could I say? It was a compliment, surely, if anything. So I acted as though I hadn't noticed anything, but unfortunately the rest of the gym had, and they had a good chuckle over it. Not in a nasty way, but good-humouredly. Steve gave it his all, and that's as much as anyone can ask of anyone. But he was quite noisy. Yes, many of the sounds and grunts he would make were the same noises that came out of my mouth. And he would scream the place down often not in real agony, but just kind of for effect, thinking that's what was expected of him, although thinking he was putting a little bit on it. It backfired on him one day, on a leg day, the biggest day of the week, and it was always nasty, very nasty. We warmed up on a bike for 3 or 5 minutes or so, and then stretched for a short time before launching into leg extensions. And our one working set with force reps drop sets, and even negative reps right at the end of it all. Our quads were fried after one set. Then we walked, well, kind of waddled is the word, holding onto things as we could go, over to the leg press. We would alternate the leg press and Smith's machine squat, just as Dorian and Kenny had been doing that I'd seen. We warmed up relatively quickly. Our quads weren't going to get any warmer. And maybe after 2 warm-up sets, we were looking at the leg press loaded up with every 50 kilo and 25 and 20 kilogram plate in the whole gym for a set of between 12 and 15 good, deep reps. This was my normal working weight, and I went first and ground out 12 reps, with Steve encouraging me for another 3 or 4 reps. Then Steve decided he would up the ante and use the same weight that I had used. Now, Steve normally used a good 3/4 of a plate side less than me normally. And I told him to stick to his same normal weight, but he wanted to increase his weight. So he was adamant he was going to use the same weight that I had used. Maybe it was the bandana giving him a false sense of security or identity. I don't know. But in he went. I was stood at the top of the leg press just in case he couldn't lift the weight back up. In case it dropped on him, I was ready there to pull it back up if I could. And there were safety catches, but they were set very low on this machine to allow a full range of movement. I counted in him and off he went. The weight went down under good control, and then a blood-curdling scream issued from his mouth, from the bottom of his belly to his tonsils at the top of his throat. Ah! He was in trouble, serious trouble. I grabbed the weight and somehow managed to raise it back up to the point where I could safely rack it on and release the weight off his legs, and we could see what the damage was. He was screaming in agony. I thought he had torn both quad muscles right off the kneecap. Everyone crowded around the leg press, and we managed to get him out of place and into a recovery position and called for an ambulance. I felt terrible. Damn, my leg workout was ruined. No, seriously, I was concerned about him, and when the paramedics arrived, he said he couldn't move either of his legs nor his waist. The medical guys checked his quads out and said they were fully intact, so at least he hadn't torn or ruptured his quads. They gave him a shot of morphine, and still he was still screaming constantly, but that seemed to kind of settle him down, and it did the trick. They put him on a stretcher, and off he went in the ambulance up to the local hospital. When I would see him next in the gym was unknown. It was unknown if he would be able to ever train in the gym again. No one knew. I very compassionately carried on with my leg workout and went even more balls to the wall than usual. I'm sure it's what he would have wanted. That's what I thought, I'm sure. Even if he didn't, I did. Well, the evening went and I got home to eat and relax, just as I would normally after a leg workout. But I thought I would call the hospital to see how Steve was and see if I could speak to him, if there was anything I could do for him or help him in any way. But strangely, the hospital could find no record of him. I thought, surely he hasn't died. The receptionist asked all around the wards and they couldn't find anyone with his name. So I decided to leave it that night and ask again in the morning, as sometimes it takes a few hours for names to go through the system to get registered, etc. I called again first thing in the morning, but again the answer was no, there's no one here with that name. I wondered if maybe they'd taken him to a different hospital, maybe a specialised hospital, if he maybe needed some specialist treatment. So I was a little bit worried when I went into work the next day, thinking people would be saying, pointing, there's the guy that put poor old Steve in the hospital last night. He's a fucking animal. But no one said a word and no one even mentioned the name. Strange, I thought. I went through my day and later on I went home, as it was always a rest day after leg day. But on my way home, as I was driving up the hill towards the village where I lived, I spotted Steve in his work clothes, heading for his home on the hill, walking back from work. I stopped the car and I got out. I'd say I'd run out, but it was after leg day, so I kind of crawled out and called Steve over, saying, "Hey, how you doing, buddy? Are you okay? You know, what happened in the hospital? What happened, man?" He looked at me kind of sheepishly and said that he'd been taken in and his legs and his abdomen had been checked out, and actually there was nothing wrong with him. He may have pulled an abdominal muscle, but there was no visible tearing of any damage. It hadn't done an MSI. He was fine. There was nothing actually wrong with him. I'm still, to this day, not entirely sure exactly what he felt on that machine that day. Did he feel something slightly tear, or I really don't know. But it was kind of a crazy situation. Well, one part of me thought, my God, I've really done this guy some damage. And secondly, he's walking along the road fine as normal. I'm like, I don't understand this. Anyway, part of the day, part of life for me back then. The other really hardcore training partner that I had was a girl called Julie. Now, she was petite, tiny, and she had the heart of a lioness and the capacity for taking and inflicting pain, the good sort, like very few ever had. In fact, many of the women I have trained with over the years, and there's not been many, as I haven't really had many training partners for some reason. A lot of people don't really want to train with me for some reason, except the crazy people like Simon Bisley, the artist. Expect a podcast with Simon very shortly, by the way. Anyway, Julie always came to the gym in baggy sweatpants and a rag top or a baggy t-shirt or sweatshirt. And like many of today's women who trained then, as today I guess, she wasn't at the gym to impress anybody but herself. She didn't want people looking at her or being propositioned by the local gym perv. Oh yes, every gym has one. I'm sure you'll know one at your gym. I won't say who it is at my gym, but knowing him, he'd probably be quite proud of it if I said who it was. She was there for one thing and one thing only: to train hard, sweat blood and guts, and improve. So we trained together for quite a few months, and she was brutal, an awesome trainer. I've heard it said that women have a great capacity for pain because they have evolved to give birth, which I can imagine is extremely painful. Well, whatever it is, you make a big mistake if you write off training with a girl due to her sex. If she's pushing those weights like she is insane, she trains harder than any guy in the place by far, then I suggest working out together for a workout or two. And if it works, stick with it, and it just may be the best training decision you ever make. Remember Billy Payne used to train with Dorian? As well often, he trained with Paula Birkinshaw regularly. They were both as hardcore as each other. They were beasts. So, after Rich, Vicky, and then Steve, I was pretty well stuck on my own. No one wanted to train that hard, apparently. They all wanted to portray the big bodybuilders, but when it came to the training, then strangely they all wanted to stick to their own system, which was basically 3 to 4 sets of 6 to 8 reps, and mainly chest and biceps 3 times a week. This high-intensity stuff was beginning to look like a lonely endeavour. However, again, Rich came to the rescue, and whenever he was around, he would always give me a spot, knowing exactly what I needed, just not personally wanting to go that extreme himself. That was a blessing to me, and he really helped me keep moving forwards. At a time when people were thinking I was an absolute freak, my body also had transmorphed into a 23-stone mass of hard muscle. I was beginning to look like a creature from another planet. Even walking down the street in my suit, I remember a friend was working on the top of a roof of a building on that street. I remember him standing up on the top of this roof and screaming out, "Hey, what a monster, you freak!" And he meant it in the nicest possible way. I had changed into something that I could no longer hide. It was beginning to become attached to what people associated with me, and hence part of my identity. Not always the greatest thing when you wish to be taken seriously in business or intellectually, as sadly people mistakenly assume many connotations about bodybuilders, and many of them are not positive ones. Things at Temple, though, were becoming much more positive. The guys were treating me with a lot of respect. The changes they had seen me make in a relatively short period of time had made them sit up and take notice of me. Not just as a young and up-and-coming national level bodybuilder, but as someone who possibly had the potential to go all the way in the sport. Even Dorian had noticed. I'd driven up to Telford on the Friday night, as usual, to my girlfriend mother's house, and on the Saturday morning was due to train legs. And I knew Dorian was in to train also. I drove down to Brum on the Saturday morning and warmed up as usual. A little early, as Dorian hadn't turned up yet. I started off with leg extensions, and one of the regular lads gave me a spot for my working set. You were never short of someone to give you a hand in Temple Gym, that's for sure. I hobbled away from the leg extension machine and walked over to the Smith's machine, where I was just about to start warming up for my squats. When Dorian came in and joined Kenny, he looked over at me at the Smith's machine and said, "Hi Paul, shame you're not doing legs tomorrow. You could have joined us." I looked up, felt my legs and thought, what the hell, I may never get another chance like this. So I replied, "If you're serious, I'll stop right now and I'll come back tomorrow." He smiled and said, of course he was serious. And so I stopped what I was doing there and then. I gathered my gym stuff together and told them I'd be back in the morning. What time would they like me to be there? Around 10 or 10:30, Paul, Dawes replied, and I left the gym partly excited to be training with Dorian, and especially on legs, and partly thinking how much had I taken out of my quads today, because the last thing I wanted to do was to embarrass myself in front of them both. It's crazy looking back that I would even worry about the one exercise I had done. But I did worry about not living up to whatever expectation Dorian may have had of me. So I made sure I did everything I could think of to recover 100% to be fully ready for the following morning. As it turned out, nothing in the world could have prepared me for the next morning, that could have prepared me for the baptism of fire that I was about to go through. To enter the lion's lair itself, to enter the underworld, or perhaps more accurately, metaphorically and literally, I was going to face my own Jungian shadow and train with the beast. Only this beast was Dorian Yates, the face of heavy-duty training. This was it. That's all for today, folks. Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone who's been in touch and for your comments and for the stories you'd like to hear. I appreciate every single one of your comments. So, finally, as always, a quote from one of the great Stoic philosophers. This week it's two quotes, one leading into another from Seneca. Aren't you ashamed to reserve yourself only the remnants of your life and to dedicate to wisdom only that time which can't be directed to business? And then to remember this, the human being is born with an inclination towards virtue. It's true. We are born with an inclination towards virtue. Follow that virtue. You know when you're doing something good, when you're doing something right. Follow it. Never neglect the little voices in your head, the voice of virtue and the one that wants you to mess up and to fall short of your ultimate purpose in life. Stay strong, stay virtuous, be honest, tell the truth, don't lie. Train hard, train like a beast. And as always, remember, there are always 3 more reps in you. Thanks very much. See you next week. Goodbye.